What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Bludborn, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the missions that have been added to the Umbar expansion of the Lord of the Rings Online. Now before we jump into the video, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so you get all future updates as they come out, and make sure that you like the video if you find it helpful or entertaining. Jump in Discord and make sure you're following me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Bludborn. On November 8th of 2023, The Lord of the Rings Online introduced its newest expansion, the Corsairs of Umbar. While normally when an expansion comes out, it is met with a certain amount of pomp and circumstance and excitement by the player base, this one started off with a good deal of excitement, and then that quickly dwindled, and we are still waiting for some of the things that are supposed to be coming out with the expansion. It's taken a solid month to get to the first major dot release of Corsairs of Umbar, which is 38.1. Now 38.1 has a slew of new quests. It introduced the missions along with the Delving modifier versions of those, and also ushered in this year's Yule-Tide festival. What I really want to focus on in this particular video is the missions and the delvings that are associated with them for Corsairs of Umbar. Now, for those who are not familiar with missions are a small scaling version of an instance available to players that are level 20 and above. And they can be done in a solo version or a duo version, and they usually have different objectives, and sometimes will have what LOTRO has defined as a twist. It's kind of a special condition that happens during the mission. When missions launched with War of the Three Peaks, we had the Elder Slade missions, and there were about 86 different missions that you could partake in. Since then, there have been several additional regions that have gained missions. So in Wildwood, you've got Erebor, Gundabad, Swanfleet, Cardolan, and the newest ones in Umbar. Now, a year ago, with the Before the Shadow release, there was a new addition to the missions called Delvings. And Delvings are an optional tier-based difficulty system that it gets tacked onto missions using a stone that will change the difficulty from tier 1 all the way up to tier 12 difficulty. So now that we have the history of delvings and missions under our belt, so let's talk about the most recent addition to missions with the 10 that were added with update 38.1 to the Umbar expansion. The first thing that you're going to have to do in order to do these new missions is you're going to have to make your way into the Umbar capital and go to the Bloody Eagle Tavern in the city of Umbar. There are two mission givers inside, Malthak and Deshra, and all of these missions will be taking place in the Cape of Umbar and the Shield Isles. Now, it should be noted that one of the new missions, the Ill-Fated Cave, does not support delvings because it is not a combat-based mission. So currently there are only 9 that can be done as a delving modified mission. A second side note, it should be noted that the gear that is inside these delvings will be level 150, but currently it will only be uncommon gear, and the higher tier gear and rewards will not be available until the raid is released in 2024. So as I said earlier, there are currently 10 missions, and they are a cut above, a dark treasure, a life's work, a natural disaster, a taste for crab, an infestation of crabs, protection of the sea lanes, Ship of Wraiths, the Beast of Belfalas, and the Ill-Fated Cave. The missions themselves are fairly straightforward and pretty easy to do. It's not until you get into the delvings where things get really messy. Currently, based on our stat caps and the gear that's available to us, and the lower level essences, and people having not leveled up all of their traceries yet in their legendary weapons, the higher tier difficulty delvings are incredibly difficult, and depending on which variants you get of the malices on any given day, they can almost feel impossible, and you have to chip away at them just a little bit at a time. It should be noted also that if you are running with a certain group comp that maybe has a healer and maybe a more defensive class, you'll probably find greater success. but your results definitely will vary. Now, on the first day when these popped out, I was running them on tier 7 and was having kind of mixed results a little bit. I am not fully geared yet either, so I felt that, you know, between 6 and 7 felt appropriate to be running at. And I was still running into some issues because the variants that I had on the Malices, I actually had physical adaptation, which means basically that as I do melee damage to the target, it will become very proficient at defending against physical damage. Now, since I was doing this at a medium tier, that buff is basically a corruption that can be removed. However, when you get into these situations where you have multiple things that are attacking you and you have reflex and things like that, you can't remove them all very quickly, and so sometimes you're taking some additional damage. The other thing with Delvings is that the aggro radius is increased, so sometimes you are going to be pulling a lot more than you are normally accustomed to. So these are all things you need to be aware of. Now let's take a look at the individual missions themselves. First, we have a cut above, which really, like I said, is pretty straightforward. It's defeating the 3 different types of Corsairs. Now in this one, you really want to be careful with the brutes. The brutes are actually going to do a lot of damage to you. So if you are a ranged class or you have some CC, it might be a good idea to actually CC them and deal with the lookouts and the deckhands first. But you also need to be cognizant that there are cutthroats that are stealthed around. So you may be fighting 1 or 2 mobs and then all of a sudden you have an additional cutthroat that pops up and you're dealing with more than you can handle at that point. Once you defeat the required number of Corsairs and the different variations, you will actually be presented with the Corsair captain, Gashapar, and then you simply need to defeat him and the mission will be over and the scout will come so you can return back to the Bloody Eagle. The next mission we're going to be taking a look at is A Life's Work. This one, again, pretty straightforward. All you're going to be doing is collecting some abandoned research and then also destroying some egg nests. You're going to notice several additional basking rock worms that are around. You don't necessarily need to defeat all of them. There's some of them that are going to be very close to research papers, so you may need to kill them. And again, if you are doing this as a delving, you are going to notice that the aggro radius is going to be higher, so you may pull some additional ones, but you don't need to kill every single one of them. You don't want to go straight along the beach either. You do kind of want to, after you get the first set of papers, you want to take a right and head up the hill, and that's where the rest of the papers and beetles will be. Some of the beetles will actually aggro, and those will be the burrowers, and then there are some other types of mobs up here as well that some of them will be passive and some of them will aggro you. Similar to the last mission, once you have destroyed the nests and also found all the research papers, you'll be presented with the Hive Queen, which you'll need to kill. One thing that I would recommend at this point is before you finish the last of the nests or research papers is kill all of the burrowers that are at the top of the hill, so you're not having to fight the Hive Queen at the same time as several of the burrowers. There's going to be a lot of poisons on you, and they just do a lot of damage if you're doing it as a delving. But if you want to, go ahead, pull the boss, kill the boss, and focus it, and then you can run over to the scout and leave before killing any of the other mobs. The next one we are going to be looking at is A Taste for Crab. Now this one, again, is very straightforward initially, where you're going to be collecting shellfish from traps and then also collecting claws from defeated great crabs. Now, thing you want to watch out for with the crabs specifically is that they do put a lot of wounds on. So if you are picking up multiple mobs at one time, you're not going to necessarily be able to clear all the wounds. And if you are doing this in a delving, you are going to have other things to worry about. So having a bunch of wounds on you that you're not necessarily able to clear is going to make things a lot more challenging than they need to be. So you might need to slow down on your pulls, do 1 or 2 mobs at a time, and then just manage it that way for now until you get further geared. Very similar to the previous 2 missions, this one, once you have completed the prerequisites, you will be required to defeat a boss. depending on where you actually finished with the crab legs or the traps, you may need to walk around a little bit to find the crab cast mother. Once you do, it's pretty noticeable. She is very large. And once you defeat her, then you can talk to the scout and head back to the Bloody Eagle. The next mission we're going to be taking a look at is protecting the sea lanes. Again, very straightforward. We are on a ship and we need to defeat 15 Corsairs and then find several of the wounded crew members and tend to them. Something you want to be aware of as you're fighting in the lower decks here is that their aggro radius is pretty generous in here, so as you are around a corner, you may pull 3 or 4 of the Corsairs at one time. Just something to be mindful of, and especially depending if you are doing this as a delving, that may be additional buffs, debuffs, bleeds, wounds, fears, all kinds of stuff. So be cognizant of where you are and what your placement is, and try to be mindful of your pulls in here because it can get pretty tricky. And once you've killed all the mobs on the lower decks, you're actually going to need to go up to the main deck. And the problem here is that as soon as you come up through the door, you are going to be aggroing several mobs around you. So be ready for that. Pre-apply some buffs before you go through the door, and that should help you deal with the additional mobs that are going to aggro right away. Keep in mind that some of these mobs are ranged, so you may have to move around and be cognizant of where these other mobs are, because if you move to a ranged mob, if you are melee, you may be pulling additional mobs. So sometimes you may just have to deal with it if you can't CC them or move to them without pulling more. Much like all the previous missions so far, once you have completed all the prereqs, you will be presented with Belazam the Bitter, the captain of this boat, and then you will simply need to kill him and you'll be all finished with this mission. You can talk to the scout and head back to the Bloody Eagle. The next mission up is going to be the Beast of Belfalas. Now this one is very straightforward. All we need to do is defeat Terrasad, the Beast of Belfalas. Now all we have to do with this one is run along the coastline here. You are going to need to defeat several vile rockworms to get to the cave. You're going to go along the coastline and take a right into the cave. Now you can kind of jump off the cliffside here and go in the water and skip a lot of the rockworms, and then you want to get into the cave area here. And once you get into the cave, you are going to see that there's a lot of other rockworms around. Once you get in and see Terrasad pull, this one I would probably recommend to just go focus the boss and get to the scout and get out. Once you're back at the Bloody Eagle, we can go ahead and pick up the next mission in the list, and we'll get started on that one. The next mission that we're going to come across is a Dark Treasure. Now this one posed several problems for me, but we're going to go over the first part of it and then we'll kind of cover the problems. So with the Dark Treasure, pretty straightforward in its objectives. We need to find and collect a treasure cache and defeat Corsairs. Now, defeating the Corsairs is not really the issue. Same as a lot of the other missions that we've done so far. We're going to go ahead and go along the beach here and kill some of these. Be mindful that there are some cutthroats also in the area, so you may come across some of them, along with lookouts and deckhands. So we have melee, we have ranged, and we have stealth. So depending on the delving that you have, that could be pretty difficult to deal with. So just be mindful of your pulls. Check for cutthroats. If you have tomes of tracking or something like that, that could be useful. Or if you have a hunter in your group, obviously check for them first to see if that's going to be an additional pull or not. Now, where this particular mission gave me some trouble was actually when you get up to the treasure cache, because there are several of the Corsairs around, and when you get close to the treasure cache, you also get 3 cursed spirits that are going to spawn. Now, if you're obviously in the middle of combat with the Corsairs and the spirits spawn, you're going to have a hard time dealing with all of the damage that's coming out. And if it's a delving, you're really going to have a hard time with it. So my suggestion would be that is don't run all the way up to the chest. If you can, go ahead and taunt or range pull the mobs that are around the chest first and get them away from it and pull them back further into the camp. That way, when you do get up to the chest, you're not going to have additional mobs. You will only have the spirits to deal with. One of the problems that I found with this instance right now is that if you do die and you retreat back to the starting point for the mission, there are some invisible walls that happen, and one time I went through it just fine. One time I actually died to misadventure. What I did find is that if you come across the red line wall, turn sideways and you'll be able to strafe through it and continue on with the mission. The next mission up on the list is going to be a natural disaster. Now this one's kind of cool. We get to actually see some Huarns that are a little different in design. They are matching with the island aesthetic, and they just look kind of cool. So, but basically all we need to do on this one is we need to defeat the 2 different types around, and once you have completed that, you will see the main tree spawn, which you can't miss because it is huge. So once you've defeated the large tree, that is the boss, then you will go back to the Bloody Eagle one more time. This brings us to an infestation of crabs. An infestation of crabs is incredibly buggy right now. There are a lot of extra mobs, not extra mobs, but they're very densely packed in here. So when you actually move around the deck of the ship in the lower levels, you're actually just going to pull way too many, and depending on the delving modifier you have, that is not going to bode well. It's going to be a lot of wounds. You're going to have hardened shell. You could have physical adaptation, which needs to be removed, or you could literally be doing 0 damage to any of the mobs. There are some areas in the cabin area which have some invisible walls and some issues with the hull leaks that are creating areas where you can't walk very well. So you'll see some camera clipping and things like that, and that can actually put you in a situation where you accidentally pull some of the crabs. So be very mindful. I've heard from a lot of other players at this point that they're not doing this mission right now until it is fixed, or they're not simply just not doing it as a delving, and they're just doing it as a mission for right now. But once you have defeated the crab hunters and the great crabs, and you've patched all the leaks, and you move on to the next part, which is to defeat the 2 greater crabs. Now once you've done that part, you're all finished up with this particular mission. Now, I did have an issue where the Umbari scout did show up and then disappeared, and the mission just completed, so I actually had to just leave the instance. I couldn't actually talk to the scout. So just a heads up, if you don't see the scout but the mission is completed, this goes for all missions. Go ahead and just leave the instance and talk to the mission giver to complete everything. The next mission up on the list is a Ship of Wraiths. Now, while this one is straightforward, there's a lot of mobs that you need to kill of different types, and you also need to find captain sailors and find and rescue 1 noblewoman. There's not a very clear indication of where to specifically go in this particular mission, so you do have to kind of roam around a little bit, and then you'll find different blight callers, whites, brine drinkers, and all that stuff. So you'll find all the things that you need. You do have to kind of roam around a little bit. Some are on the island, some are out in the water, some things are behind the boats. So just, you're gonna have to kind of get a feel for where things are, and then, you know, run it multiple times, and you'll kind of figure out a line to run. Try to make sure that the noblewoman is the last part of the objectives that you do, because the actual final boss actually will spawn very close to where she is. So if you're going and finding some random mob like I did, and then you'll have to come back to where you already were. So try to make sure that the noblewoman is the last thing that you do, so that you can go fight the boss right afterwards. Now the last mission out of the 10 is the Ill-Fated Cave, in which you have roughly 8 minutes to clear all the rubble that's in here and find the trapped miners. Now this is actually the same exact quest that you did if you did the questing in the area. It's the same one, except the end has a little different part to it. This is also the one that has no delving modifiers because there is no combat here. Once you've actually completed all of the rubble and finding all of the trapped miners, then you'll actually be able to find the gem at the other end of the mine. Once you've reached the cave entrance again, the Umbari scout will appear, so you can either talk to the scout or just go ahead and walk through the door. It doesn't really matter. So that wraps up the 10 missions that we have so far. Now it is supposed to be a thing that we are getting more missions for Umbar later, but here is one of the other problems that we have right now with missions at level 150. As I said at the beginning, the loot has been scaled up to 150 but is only uncommon from the drops. So completing a higher tier delving at this point doesn't have a whole lot of benefits other than the writs. And most players will still float around the tier 6 to tier 7 delving for getting the most bang for your buck. As far as how long these things take, in the higher tiers, they just take a very long time, and the writ payout versus the amount of time really just isn't that good. So in some cases, your time could be better spent, like right now doing the Yule Festival with Store of a Gun and things like that. So make sure that you are finding out what works best for you as far as how much you're getting as your rewards versus the time you're spending. Overall, I don't think these missions are bad. They're a little bit better than some of the previous ones we've had. I do think they needed a little bit more testing. Maybe the mob density could have been tweaked down a little bit. Maybe some of the aggro radiuses and things like that. Also, some of the mixtures of delving modifiers plus some of the buffs that certain types of mobs have in general just create very, very bad experiences as far as trying to complete these things. So I can imagine that on certain days, you just won't do certain delvings based on what the modifiers are for that day and what the mobs are in there. You may just be skipping days or skipping particular mission delvings. So that's going to wrap up this video. Be sure to like it if you found it helpful or entertaining, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for any of the future updates that drop. I will be covering them here. Also, make sure you head over to my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Bludborn. Subscribe over there. Make sure you're also hopping in Discord. There is a whole section on Lord of the Rings Online over there for you to use. Post screenshots, guides, anything that you would find helpful or someone else may find helpful, feel free to use it as well. Thanks everybody, and I'll catch you in the next one.